This video is on parts of an expression. Please make sure you fill in the top with the appropriate information, your first name, last name. The topic is parts of an expression. Make sure you have today's date. Make sure you have also today's or whatever bell that you are in. It's really important to make sure you do understand all of these as far as parts of the expression goes, because it carries you through to algebra as well. So the first thing we're looking for whenever we're seeing an expression is what we're going to try to find is anything that is a like term. And a like term literally means things that are alike. So for example, I have terms up here that have a variable in it, and then I have terms in here that don't have any variables. I always think of it as apples and oranges, or whatever you might want to think, two different things. Some people also say families, so you can think of them as the family members staying together, or the different families staying together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to circle all of my terms that have a variable in them. When I'm circling, make sure that you circle the sign that is in front of it. Now this one doesn't have a sign in front of it, it's just 14x, but we know it's positive. The positive 9 does not have an x, so I'm not going to circle it. The 2x does have a variable, so I'm going to circle it, but I need to circle that negative sign there with it. That minus is also considered a negative. It kind of flips back and forth. The 8, again, does not have a variable. The 5x does have a variable with it. Again, it's a negative 5x. And then we also have a positive 1, which does not have an x. So my like terms so far for my variables, these all have a variable in it, is I have 14x, I have negative 2x, and I also have negative 5x. So do make sure that you are keeping those signs with it, because again, that minus becomes a negative when needed. Now we also have some more things to circle, some more terms. So the other terms I have there, and this time I'm actually going to box them off with a square. That 9 is just a 9, but it's very similar to being the 8 here, because it doesn't have a variable, and then also the 1 here. But again, in all cases, I put the plus sign with it, which means all of those are positive. So the other like terms I have is I have a 9, I have an 8, and I have a 1. So again, when we're talking like terms, all of these are alike. All these three terms right here that have a variable, they are all alike. They go together. And then my three constants here, they go together. So those are my like terms, and I have taken care of all of my terms. Now, these numbers here, the 9, the 8, and the 1, these are actually called constants. And so I'm going to go ahead and write that right here, the 9 and the 8 and the 1. And constants are numbers with no variables with it. So they are numbers with no variable. Where my like terms can have variables or not. It might not. Like up here we have, again, the ones with the x and the ones without the x. The next thing we have is coefficients. Now, coefficients deal with our variables again. So my terms that had variables, I had my 14x, I had my negative 2x, and I had my negative 5x. Those are my terms with variables. I have to look at the number that is in front of that variable. So what I'm looking at here in this one is 14. It's a positive 14, so this is one of my coefficients right there, the positive 14. Again, remember we circled our signs with our number, and this is why, because this right here, our coefficient of x, on that one is a negative 2. So make sure that you are circling those signs. If you only put 2 on that, it's incorrect, and be careful of that on tests and quizzes. This one here, again, we're circling that coefficient, that number in front of the variable, that in this case x, and that is a negative 5. So I have 3 coefficients there. Remember, my 9, my 8, and my 1 that we put over here, these are just constants. They're not a coefficient. They don't have a variable with them. They constantly are the same thing. 9 is always 9, 8 is always 8, 1 is always 1. All right, now that we understand, hopefully, a little bit more about that, let's do a couple of examples just to see how many like terms and constants and coefficients we have. So first of all, my like terms for number 1. Again, the best way I can tell you to do this is to circle your terms. In this case, I have two terms in this expression. I have 11a, and then I also have a positive 4a. And I apologize, my pen is kind of thick, so you can see on your paper too. So they are both a's. They both have an a in them. They of the coefficient, a variable of a. That makes them alike. So my like terms here are 11a and 4a. And that was a positive 4a, not a negative, so that was okay. So I have 11a and 4a. I actually have no constants here because the 11 and the 4, they're not by themselves. They're not all alone. They are with a variable. So there's actually no constants in this one. I have nothing there. But I also do have coefficients because, again, remember the coefficient is in front of the variable. I have two terms, and they both have a variable. So my coefficients are 11 and 4. And again, they were both positive, so I don't worry about my negative sign there. The next one I have is for number 2, again, let me circle all my terms. I like to circle my like terms together, and since we have different things in here, I'm going to do them a little differently. You can do circles, you can do squares, you can do different colors, triangles, underline, whatever works for you. But here I'm going to start with my variables. I have a 3x, and I have a positive 7x. So I've circled those. So right now those are alike. I have a 3x and I have a positive 7x. So that's 7x. Now I'm going to use another color because now I have my positive 6 and I have a negative 4. Those are different. I mean, they're different in the sense of from the variable. These are my constant terms, but they are like terms because they're both constants. So this is a 6. And this is a negative 4. Again, watch that sign. You don't want to leave it off. Okay, so now we also go to constants. What we just said, the ones I just did in red, those are my constants. So I have 6 and I have negative 4 for my constants. And then we have coefficients. I can look again at my column with the like terms, and our coefficients are in front of the variable. So I have a 3 in front of that variable. I have a 7 in front of that variable. So my coefficients are 3 and 7. Okay, I'm going to jump down to do one that's a little harder maybe. And we have here number 6. So on number 6, we're looking again, the first column we're looking for are things that are like terms. So again, I'm going to circle all of my terms. I'm going to start with my ones with variables. So I have a negative 10r. I have a negative r, and I have a negative 6r. All of those are alike, so I'm going to go ahead and write those down as my like terms. So I have negative 10r, I have a negative r, and I have a negative 6r. My 11 isn't like anybody else. He's the only constant I have there, so he doesn't get put in this at all. I don't put him down because there's nobody else like him. So there's nothing else to put in my like term column. However, I'm going to circle him because we have a positive 11 because that is actually our next column. Our next column, remember, is our constants. I only have that 11, so there's my constant right there for 11. Now my last column, remember, we're looking for our coefficients. So I'm going to look back at my, since all my like terms have my variables in them, I'm looking at the coefficient of the variable. So in this one I have a negative 10. There's one of them, so that's a negative 10 for a coefficient. I have a negative in front of the r. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, there's a little 1 hiding in there, okay, because we have only one r sitting there, but it happens to be a negative 1r. So my coefficient of r is negative 1 in this case. If I had a plain old r, just r, it would be a positive 1 because there'd be no negative sign with it. My coefficient for negative 6r is the negative 6. That's my coefficient there. So I also have negative 6. There were 3 coefficients that we had there. The next one I want to look at is number 9. So for number 9, we're going to do the same thing. We have, now this time we have some things, other things we combine. Be careful. I have different variables on this one. I have 8a minus 7b plus 1 minus 2b plus 3a. So I have a's and b's for my variables. Remember, families stick together, or if you want to think of them as apples and bananas, think of them that way. So I kind of think of them as apples and bananas. So all of my a's, I'm going to start with the a's, These are going to might be my like terms here. I have an 8a and I have a positive 3a. So those two are alike, 8a and 3a, positive 3a. But I also have b's that are alike. So I'm going to circle them in another color. I have a negative 7b and I have a negative 2b. So these are both negative. So I have a negative 7b and I have a negative 2b. Now again, I have a constant here, and my poor little constant is all alone. He's a positive 1, but he is not like anybody else. So he doesn't go in the like term column because there's nobody else like him. So the next thing I'm looking at here is my constant, and that means my 1 is going to go there in my constant column. And now we're looking for our coefficients. I do have 4 coefficients because my coefficients are in front of a variable. Doesn't matter that I have 2 different variables, I still have 4 coefficients. So my coefficients now are going to be 8, I have 3, I have a negative 7, and I have a negative 2. All of those are my coefficients. So make sure that you're thinking of, it doesn't matter that they're not the same the families or anything, that they are still coefficients, all 4 of those. So for the rest of this, make sure you're working out the rest of those problems. But this is the key thing again, circle all of your terms. Make sure you keep like terms together, whether you use a color or whether you box them off. For example, I could do, if I just had a plain pencil, I might do like all my X's with a box, and then all my y's with a circle, and then all of my constants I would just underline. So whatever kind of coding you want to use to make sure that you know what like things go together, make sure you use that. Go ahead and work on the rest of these on this side so that you can make sure that you really understand what you're doing.